And now I'd like to introduce Jack Beck, who's the Executive Director of TurnOut. He began his career working with community-based HIV organizations. And as he did that work, realized that there were a lot of nonprofits that needed help and a lot of volunteers who didn't know where to help. And so he's playing matchmaker. That's what I kind of like to think of it, Jack, as matchmaker. So with that, we're going to turn it over to you to talk to us. And again, we really appreciate that you're here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I wonder if it's possible. Oh, you know what? I do have the ability to share my screen, so I'm going to do that right now. This should say audience window. Yes. Okay, perfect. Can you all see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay. Hello. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Cheryl, for that introduction. My name is Jack Beck, as Cheryl said. I'm the founder and executive director of a Bay Area organization called TurnOut, which I will tell you all about. I really wanted to just thank you for allowing me to be here. I was particularly excited by this invitation because my whole family has always been involved with Rotary. My grandfather was a huge Rotarian. It was like a really important part of his life. My uncles were all in Rotary. And it's just been an organization that's been really important in my family. And I think when I was growing up, I viewed it as kind of like an old boys club a little bit that felt a little bit inaccessible to me, just the way they talked about it. Who knows if that was even true for their chapters. But it's so cool to be with a queer and trans organization, chapter of Rotary that makes this really incredible organization more accessible to our community. So I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for having me. I know Cheryl mentioned a little bit about my own background. I can tell you just in a little more detail about who I am and why I started TurnOut. I've been involved with LGBTQ nonprofits for my entire career. Right after I graduated from college, even before I graduated from college, I was involved with some organizations, but I really wanted to get involved in service for LGBTQ causes. And the reason is because, when I was in high school, before I came out of the closet, I came out when I was, I think, 17. So there were a couple of years where I still was not out, but as many queer young people, I was not living under a rock. I was kind of out in the community, and I ended up running into like some of the scary stuff that a lot of teenagers run into, except I really couldn't talk to anybody about it. And I couldn't talk to my family about it. And I couldn't talk to my teachers about it or my friends about it. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. I thought someone said something. Feel free to interrupt me if you have any questions. But it was really the local LGBTQ organization in my area that gave me the support that I needed when I really didn't feel like I had anyone else that I could talk to or rely on, especially as a young person, when you really, you might think you know a lot of things, but then you run into situations where you really don't know how to handle them. And so it's really nice to have LGBTQ adults available. And that's what a lot of the LGBTQ nonprofits do. And they do that for not just youth, but for a lot of different causes that I'll be talking about today. So I've always been passionate about supporting the queer and trans nonprofit infrastructure. And that is what TurnOut is all about. So I'm really excited to share that with you today. So what is our mission at TurnOut? We work to mobilize communities to power queer and trans movements. So basically what we do is we spend all year going out into the community, connecting with people who are passionate about queer and trans issues, and bringing them into our network to help them find meaningful ways to do service to support queer and trans nonprofits. Basically, we are working to convert the massive amounts of passion for these issues that exist in our communities into real impact for our organizations to drive our movements forward. So for this talk, I want to give a little bit of context for queer and trans nonprofits to start off with. I think that is a really good way to kind of look at the landscape of like what nonprofits are even out there, what kind of work are they doing, what is the funding landscape that they're working with, what kind of resources do they have access to, what do they need. So we'll start with a little bit of context, then I'll talk to you a little bit about what we do at TurnOut, the impact of what we do, and then we can do any questions that y'all have. So I will start with the context for queer and trans nonprofits. Actually, this photograph was taken at Silicon Valley Pride, I think in like 2018. So that is, it's one of my favorite photographs from our early work. So what is the context for queer and trans nonprofits? As LGBTQ people, we often cannot rely on mainstream institutions or even our own biological families for the support that we need. And in that gap, it has really been organizations created by LGBTQ people for LGBTQ people that have stepped up to fill that gap. And these organizations are working on a ton of different diverse issues, from housing for unhoused LGBTQ youth. A lot of people don't realize that 40% of homeless youth in the United States identify as LGBTQ. That is a huge percentage. To housing and support for queer and trans elders who might not have biological children to support them as they enter their later years. Sexual health services, mental health services, HIV services, international human rights, employment advocacy, immigration support. Immigration is something that is often very gendered if you're dealing with legal documentation, and having specialized support around that can be crucial, especially for trans people. Support for people who have been incarcerated. A lot of folks don't know that 20% of trans women have been incarcerated and 50% of Black trans women have been incarcerated. That is like an insane statistic. And there are organizations whose sole mission is to support queer and trans people who have been incarcerated and are either currently in prison or have been incarcerated and are recently released. And it's not only organizations that really support our basic human needs, it's also organizations that help us expand our thinking and our imagination of who we can be as people and where we come from. It's queer and trans nonprofits who work to record our history and work to support our artists. As a fundraiser for TurnOut, I actually used to host a queer history bike tour of the Bay Area. And in order to write that script, I read a bunch of books about queer history in San Francisco. And all of those books came from documentation from the GLBT Historical Society, who had been working to gather data, like pulling boxes from people's attics that had been donated, going through their old stuff to piece together the history of our people, which is not in mainstream archives, and a lot of mainstream historians don't really care enough about it to do that work. So all of this is to say that LGBTQ nonprofits are providing services to our communities that are absolutely invaluable. Excuse me. I'm getting over a cold, as I think many people are under the weather right now. So I think it's probably clear to everybody in this group how valuable these organizations are. However, they are extraordinarily underfunded. So if you look at the funding that's available for LGBTQ causes, if you look at the foundation side, only 2.28% of foundation dollars in the US go to LGBTQ nonprofits. That means for every 100 foundation dollars, it's like only 28 cents that goes to LGBTQ nonprofits. It is really, 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 really low, and it's certainly an underrepresentation by population. And you might think that is made up for by a bunch of LGBTQ adults really donating to LGBTQ nonprofits. And that's also unfortunately not the case. Only about 3% of LGBTQ people have ever donated to an LGBTQ nonprofit. And whenever I cite this statistic, I always, it sounds really grim and very sad, but I always want to pair it with the fact that in any donations to any cause, the number one reason why people have not donated is because they have never been asked. So it's not that LGBTQ people are like really heartless and cold and don't want to support our own nonprofits. Usually it's because our organizations are really small. They often don't have a dedicated development person to be going out into the community, doing donor recruitment, asking people for donations. And so a lot of LGBTQ people have just never been asked to donate. So we see that as a big part of our work at TurnOut, as well as getting these organizations in front of people who not only can become volunteers, but who can become donors as well. So, that is the funding landscape. It isn't great. There's not a lot of money to support this work. However, our communities are really rich in this other resource, which is our people. There are thousands upon thousands of LGBT people who are passionate about our communities and want to get involved. However, there are a lot of barriers for folks who do want to get involved in supporting queer and trans grassroots groups. So, for the same reason that these organizations are not out recruiting a bunch of donors, they're also not out recruiting a bunch of volunteers. They're often too under-resourced to kind of do systematic volunteer outreach and engagement. So as a result, they're like not visible to people who want to support them. So I don't know if I'm actually certain probably many people in this group have had the experience of trying to find organizations where you can maybe volunteer or maybe make a donation. And if you want to volunteer, for example, many people will send an email out and never hear back. It'll just go into the void and no one will get back to them. Or they'll hear back like a month later or 2 or 3 months later. So, it's hard to find organizations to begin with. It's often you don't hear back when you do find an organization. Even when you do show up, often these organizations might not be well prepared to support you as a volunteer. They're often running around, putting out fires, doing a million things. And, sometimes they're not able to really support volunteers in the way that volunteers ideally would be supported to have a really positive experience. And even when you have volunteered, often you don't hear back after the event to stay engaged with the organization. So all of this kind of results in a poor volunteer experience, and a lot of people end up just dropping out of volunteer service. A thing we have heard from a lot of folks in the community is, I'm just trying to help, like it shouldn't be this hard. Like I'm trying to donate my time. Why is it so painful and difficult? And because this is the way things have been working, a lot of LGBT nonprofits are missing the opportunity to build relationships that can result in long-term volunteers, long-term advocates, and long-term donors to support their organizations. So this is really the kind of world that TurnOut was born in. This was a big problem that we saw, and this is what we created TurnOut to fix. So what is our model at TurnOut? We see that a lot of LGBT nonprofits really need volunteer support, but they don't have the capacity to do high quality volunteer recruitment and management themselves. So that's what we do. That's our added value. We do that through going out into the community and recruiting a large local pool of talented, passionate volunteers who are interested in LGBTQ nonprofits. And we also, in some cases, will provide volunteer management ourselves. So that's one of the ways that we raise money to support our work. We are the volunteer managers at SF Pride, Oakland Pride, at Oakland Black Pride, at a bunch of different big events, and for a number of organizations providing year-round volunteer services as well, as a way to bring in funding to support volunteer services for the entire community. So that's our model. We recruit, we build this pool, and then we also work to build relationships with every queer and trans nonprofit that we can find. So we build relationships with these organizations. We we work to understand what their volunteer needs are because we're talking with them all the time. And when they need somebody, we can say, great, we'll push that out to our network through a weekly newsletter to say, okay, here are the organizations that need people this week. This is what they need. Sign up if you're available. So that's how we work in kind of our general volunteer services. We work with a huge number of nonprofits. We work with about 150 organizations at this point. Most of these are in the Bay Area because that's where we were founded. But we recently, over the summer, expanded to Southern California. So we have new programs in Los Angeles, Orange County, and San Diego. So we're building out a new network down there to support local nonprofits in Southern California as well. So who are the volunteers? Those are the nonprofits. Who are the volunteers? We now have 5,000 people in our network. And those are both just kind of general volunteers, people who want to get involved, help out at an event, or to provide some office administration work, or to provide some skilled support for something that a nonprofit needs. And that also includes pro bono folks who have who are lawyers or who are accountants or who have communications and marketing skills. So we really actively work to recruit people who have specific skills that our nonprofits need as well. So that's what our nonprofit or our volunteer network looks like. It's about 5,000 people across California right now, most of them in the Bay Area, but a larger number growing in Southern California. So in addition to that general kind of service that we provide for free for everyone in the community, all of the queer and trans nonprofits who need help, like if they need something, they just reach out to us, we push it out to the network, and we refer people directly to them. We found over time, after the first couple of years of offering those services, we found that created kind of a platform for us to build a couple of special programs on top of, where we could really leverage these networks that we were building to offer a couple of things that were really special. So the last thing that I'll talk about is just our special programs. The first one is our youth program. I love this program. This program is, the goal of this program is to connect young people, young queer and trans people, or allied kids, or young people with activists and community leaders who are doing work at queer and trans organizations. Young folks, teenagers, they have so much passion about doing social justice work and doing community work, but often they don't have a good outlet to translate that passion into real impact and actually get their hands dirty and get involved. So this program introduces them to local organizations that are doing the work that they care about. It offers an opportunity for them to meet adults who are really making a difference, who are living their values in the world. They get to learn about tons of organizations that they never would have heard about before. This photograph is of an original piece of the AIDS quilt that we brought to one of our high school groups, where they got to actually see a real piece of LGBTQ history and hear from this. The person on the far left is Kelly Hart, who really has been a keeper of the AIDS quilt in the Bay Area for a long time. And he talked with them about what it was like to play that role and to be a steward of such an important part of LGBTQ history. And there's been a bunch of pieces that this program has taken on a lot of different forms over time, depending on what we have the resources to do. We've done a queer spring break program where we do a whole week long of programming of learning queer history and meeting queer activists and volunteering. This photograph is from one of those weeks, but right now it's a weekly meeting on Friday afternoons where students will come together on Zoom and talk, build community, meet folks doing service, etc. So that is the youth program. The next program that we run is the Queer Board Match. So one of the things we noticed when we started running our programs was a lot of the nonprofits that we worked with really needed help finding new board members. Almost every nonprofit we talked to was like, yeah, we definitely need volunteers. We need volunteers for this, this, and this. But like, do you know anybody who can serve on an LGBT nonprofit board? And at the same time, we were meeting with a lot of people in the community on the volunteer side, and people were like, yeah, I want to volunteer, but I also am interested in board service. You know, I want to get involved on a board. So there was clearly this opportunity to connect these two sides of this. It's almost, you know, there's two sides of our community that really needed to connect with each other, and we're having a really hard time connecting. So in 2019, we started hosting queer board match events to bring together nonprofits that are looking for board members with folks who are interested in nonprofit board service. And we've been running that program consistently for the last couple of years, and it has been like wildly successful. The current board chair of the SF LGBT Center came through our program. The Pacific Center in Berkeley, which offers mental health services to queer and trans people, about half of their board members at this point have come through the queer board match program. So it's a really, really valuable program that we continue to offer. And next year, we're actually, we're updating it to a year-round queer board accelerator, which I'm going to talk about next. So in addition to like making those introductions to people, we found that once people were joining boards, they were not getting any support in how to be a board member. I think if anybody here has served on a nonprofit board, you might have had this experience where you join and suddenly they're like, okay, like go out and raise money, or like go out and like, we need you to approve this budget. Like we need you to revise our governance documents. And they're not given any training on how to do any of that. So what we have done is create basically a program to train people how to have the skills and the tools and the support that they need to be an excellent board member and to really make the biggest impact possible that they can for their boards. We started it as a 3-month experiment in July of this year, and it was really successful. And this coming year, what we're doing is we're turning it into an annual subscription program. So nonprofits can subscribe for the year, and then we have monthly trainings on all sorts of different aspects of board service that any of their board members can attend as members of this program. So they are getting a regular training, and they're getting access to a Slack channel with a bunch of other board members from a bunch of other queer and trans nonprofits, where people can share information, share resources, ask for advice, get connected with, you know, examples of documents if you need like a contract template, or if you need a consultant on something specific. Like, there are queer and trans nonprofit board members are all working on the same set of challenges, and all of them are in silos and unable to talk to each other and support each other. So part of the benefit of this program is to create a space where we can start to support each other, and we can start to talk to each other, and build relationships, and you know, even build friendships. I think that's something that's really important about this work. So that's the Queer Board Accelerator. And finally, during COVID, we started doing a lot of disaster response. So during emergencies, often LGBT people, especially lower income folks, monolingual, non-English speakers, you know, folks who don't have access to the same kinds of resources often fall through the cracks. And we have found that our network is really well suited to mobilizing people very quickly to support the most vulnerable people in our communities. So during COVID, we mobilized a lot of folks to deliver food, deliver medicine to people who were falling through the cracks of the mainstream response. And that is something that we continue to look at doing as, you know, COVID continues on seemingly indefinitely. But as other, this sort of specter of other disasters is always on the horizon, you know, floods, fires, et cetera. So we're working on upskilling our volunteer network through a series of trainings in how to respond to disasters as well. So those are kind of the 4 additional programs that I just wanted to mention to give you a full scope of what we do. And I wanted to end with a quote from Dean Spade, who's an intellectual and a nonprofit person who thinks a lot about this work, especially in mutual aid. And this quote to me really embodies the way we think about service and turnout, and certainly the way I think about it in my own life, that the hope is that this work transforms us from being passive observers of the world to being inspired builders of the new world we need. So that is us. That's Turnout. That's a little bit about me. That's what we do. And I would be more than happy to answer any questions about any of this if you have any.
I have a question. It seems really unique, the model of your business. I'm just wondering, are there other such groups, like for other affinity groups, and do you learn from them the way that you present what you present?
You mean for non-LGBTQ?
Yeah, or just any kind of.
It's such an interesting question. I've thought about that a lot. I have not seen anyone using this model in our own community and any other spaces. There's one organization called Volunteer with Shelley in San Diego that is run by a person named Shelley, who used to be a volunteer coordinator at a local LGBT organization. And when she left, all the volunteers wanted to leave with her because they really liked her. And now they kind of do local stuff, but I think there's only about 2,000 people, or excuse me, 200 people in that group, because it's just kind of one person and their local community. But yeah, when I started Turnout, I thought, like, there must be a million other people doing this. Like, it makes so much sense. People care about their own communities. They want to get involved, but there's no one who helps curate an experience that speaks to LGBTQ people and what we need. Like, I thought, like, I would be racing a million other people to be the one to create this organization because I wanted to be involved. And no one else does this. I honestly don't understand why. But I think partly because it's challenging to find a way to fund it. Like, a lot of foundations don't understand what we do, and they want to fund like frontline organizations, like the organizations that we support with volunteers. The foundations are also really wanting to support like clinics and homeless shelters, et cetera, which, of course that makes sense. But I don't think they understand what we do as, I don't think they see the value in it in many cases. So we've had a hard time getting funding from a lot of grant makers, and we've had to find our own ways of making money, largely through about a third of our budget comes from contracting with large events and bringing in revenue that way. About a third of our budget comes from donors. And then we just got a really big grant from the state of California that's trying to build up its statewide volunteer base to respond to disasters. And that is what is funding our work in Southern California. So about a third of our budget comes from that too. Does that answer your question?
It does. It does. You're unique.
Yeah, I think we are, which really blows me away because I think it's a model that is really valuable, but we are unique as far as I can tell.
So Jack, with the model that you have and your familiarity with Rotary through your family, what way would be the best for Rotary to look at partnering with Turnout? Would it be for events, volunteers for events to start with, or more for ongoing membership?
I think there's a lot of ways that, like, there's so much that I think your group and our group has in common in terms of like what we focus on. I think one of the ways that we work with groups that are focused on services, we can keep you in the loop about stuff that's going on. We can make sure you're getting the newsletter that we put together every week so that you're up to date on just new service opportunities that might be interesting to people. One thing that is really valuable from our perspective is working with groups like yours that are already organized around service, and you have a number of people, so that when nonprofits come to us and they're like, hey, we need a bunch of people for this thing, and maybe often it's last minute because everything in nonprofit is always last minute. And so it would be great to be able to reach out and be like, hey, are you available for this thing? And it's totally fine if you're not. But if, you know, this group is really trying to mobilize a lot of people, and if you feel like you can bring out a couple people, it would be really valuable. So those things would be good. If you're interested in board service, you know, we do trainings for groups on like nonprofit board service 101, and you know, how to build skills around that. So we certainly, that's another way we raise money to support our work, is those we charge for those trainings, and that's something we offer to anybody who's interested in them. So that's another way that we could work together if that's a fit. But I think there's a lot of ways we could work together.
That's great. I missed how long you said that you had been in operation from your first concept to starting it until now.
Yeah, so I left my job in 2015 to start TurnOut. And then we didn't really, I spent a lot of time working with people in the community to like build our strategy. And, you know, we didn't really start our programs until 2017. So, you know, technically we were incorporated in 2015, but we launched our programs in 2017, and that's when we first started recruiting volunteers and mobilizing volunteers locally.
And have you found a reason or a connection why the larger organizations like Volunteer Match don't bring a lot to the LGBTQ community?
I have a theory about that, which I'm happy to share. You know, I can't prove it, but my theory is that, you know, we, like I said, we work with over 150 organizations. The vast majority of these organizations are too small to do any kind of systematic volunteer outreach or recruitment. So they don't have the staff to like put postings on Volunteer Match to make sure that they're getting seen by other people. When I first started doing research about whether TurnOut was even a good idea, and I was doing a lot of research on that, I think there were like 10 LGBT organizations represented on Volunteer Match in the Bay Area at the time, and there was like over 100 of them locally. So there's a lot of work that wasn't represented, and I think that probably people who are interested in this type of work were going to Volunteer Match, maybe looking for it and not finding it, and then they just decided to stop looking there. But now what we do whenever we get a new volunteer opportunity, just from our partners, we always post it on Volunteer Match through our own account. So everyone on Volunteer Match can now see those opportunities that would have been invisible to them before, because we're doing that work to make that visible in that space. And we actually recruit a lot of volunteers through Volunteer Match for a bunch of our partners.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Any questions? Any questions?
Do you guys have regular meetings or presentations?
Yeah, so we have a monthly volunteer orientation where we invite anyone who's new to our network to join and meet our staff, meet other new volunteers. It's all virtual right now. And just learn about what opportunities are coming up, learn about how we think about the work. We also use it as a little bit of a training opportunity to make sure that people, you know, we take our community pretty seriously in terms of making sure it's a safe space for people. So we use it as an opportunity to do a little bit of training around like being respectful about pronouns and like being mindful about sexual harassment in the LGBTQ community, where sometimes people think the rules are different and you can do whatever you want, and that is not the case. So we do a monthly gathering that actually, I think the next one is coming up next week. So yeah, that's something that we do regularly.
Yeah, and another question is about the board training. I had signed up for it, but I couldn't make the initial, so I had to drop out of it. And I was just wondering if you could include the next board training.
What did you sign up for specifically?
It was to volunteer for other boards. It was a match. It was a match training.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you signed up for the mailing list?
No, there was some sort of training you guys put on, or somebody put on, but I signed up through you for,
Oh, interesting.
yeah.
We usually do those trainings. At this point, we're often doing those just specifically for specific groups. We haven't, but we are launching a new program for people who are not on boards yet, who want to join boards, and we're launching that probably in March. So if you want to put your email address in the chat, I can follow up with you just to make sure you're on the right list and that we let you know when the next training comes up. I'm happy to do that.
Okay.